Hi, my name is Scott Wesley and I'm from Perth in Australia. I've been using Oracle since the year 2000 and you can find me blogging at grassroots-oracle.com. This video series is called Oracle Apex Techniques. This series will target developers of all skill sets. Beginners should understand all videos, advanced users may pick up some tips, but most of the videos will be offering to the intermediate skill level. I'll be using Apex 4.2, which is the current release. The appearance of your screens may appear different, but the concepts will be the same. The first section will be on getting started with Oracle Application Express. This video series will cover things like creating a workspace, your first application and pages, creating an item on a page, and finding your way around the Apex environment. Before we do anything, we really need to create a new workspace. Workspace is an independent area for developers to build applications. Initially, we can log into the internal workspace using the admin user, and this is a special area where we can manage the Apex environment, such as managing our instances and creating a new workspace. So I'll run through the steps for creating a new workspace. For example, we could create a new workspace called Packed New. This wizard here is something that's typical of the Apex environment. We've got a number of steps to run through a series of pages which describe your environment. So that workspace name already exists, so I'll give a unique name and continue through the wizard. In my case, I've already got an existing schema set up, so I'll choose one from this list of values here. So I'll choose the Packed New schema and continue through the wizard. We need a password and an email address there, and we can create our new workspace. And it's now being provisioned for us. So that means we can log out of the internal workspace, return to the login page, and log into our new workspace. First time you log in, you'll be asked to change your password and then log in again. Now we're in our Apex environment. It will take a little bit of getting used to the buttons and navigation that's surrounding the development environment, but you'll come to realise that the applications you build look very similar to the Apex workspace itself. All your URLs will have the server name, port number, Apex prefix here, but the signature will be this extension along here. We'll learn what all these numbers and letters mean. But to start off, we'll go to the administration section and create ourselves some more users. So we can go to the Manage Users and Groups. Now at the moment we have an admin user, but let's say we'll create a developer who's not as privileged as the administration, but can develop applications. So I'll create a new user called Scott for our default schema. He's not an administrator and is a developer and has access to these areas here. We can set up a default password as well, which could be required for change on first use. And there we can create multiple developers for our workspace, and ultimately we'll come into the application builder and create some applications. Also note that there's help available, which will take you straight to the online documentation. So now that we've created our workspace, we can start creating applications, which we'll do next. Creating your first application. Obviously, before we start building web pages, we need an application. So once you've logged into the development environment, you can click on the Application Builder link, and this takes you into the Application Builder tab, which is where you'll spend most of your time. There's already a sample database application here, but we'd like to create a new one for ourselves. So we'll click the Create link, which leads us into the wizard to define a new application, which could be a database application, which we'll choose today, a WebSheet application, which is more like a wiki-style environment, or a pre-packaged application that Oracle has provided. So we'll choose the database application, and I'm going to call mine Packed, using the Packed schema that I've already defined. I'm going to let it build a home page for me straight away, and it's going to be using the desktop user interface. So when I click Next, I can see that the home page is already defined. I could add more pages at this point, but that's generally easier to do as you go along using the other wizards. So I will click Next. I don't have any other applications to copy share components from, so I'll leave that default. All the attributes for this application I'm happy with at this point. The theme. We do have options to choose from for our theme. The standard themes are now set up with these more modern themes that are HTML5 capable. There are some classic and legacy themes that you might have available to you. For now, I'm going to choose Theme 25, which is the blue responsive theme. And we're at the end of the wizard where we can confirm and create the application with all these details. And we have our new application. It has a home page, a login page, and I can choose to run this application straight away. Type in my login details, and I now have an application which has a home page, some navigation elements, but it's ready to build on. So next up, we'll start adding some more pages to this application. Creating your first pages. Up to now we've built our workspace and our application. Now we need to start building pages so it looks more like a proper application. So if you find yourself at the runtime here, down the very bottom you can see this developer toolbar. This allows us to navigate to other parts of the development environment from our runtime. So if we click on Application, that'll take us back to the application homepage. From here we can create a new page using the Create Page. So we'll create a new page, and we have a number of options for new pages. In this case, we'll create a new form page. And again, we have a number of options as we go through the wizard. In this case, we'll create a new form with a table and a report. So now we have an option to choose what implementation method we'll use. Interactive reports we'll have a look at in a later section. For now, we'll choose a classic report. Default the page number. I'm going to call my report Products. And I'll go to the next portion of the wizard. From here we need to choose what table we're selecting from. So I'm going to choose the My Products view. And we'll add a new tab, a navigation item to allow us to get to this page. We'll accept all the fields in our report. And we need to choose a link to navigate to our form page. So I'll accept that default. And now we're defining our form page because we're creating two pages at once here. So we can call this Manage Products. And we need to communicate what record we're looking at between the report and the form. So we'll choose that it's managed by the database row ID. And now we need to choose what fields appear in our form. So I've copied all those fields across. I'm going to accept Insert, Update, Delete buttons on my new page. And we can now confirm that we're going to create pages 4 and 5. They're done, so we can run these pages now. And we can see we've got a report page, which lists all the records in our My Products table. And we can edit one of these records, and it takes us to that form. So from here we can delete the record, apply any changes that we might make, and we can also go back to the pages and see what's been done. For example, we have our Manage Products form, which has a region with some items underneath it. There's some processes that go on when we submit the page, and we can navigate back to the previous page that was created, page 4, and this is our reports page, where we can see a report region with a bunch of columns and a create button. And we can now confirm that we're going to create pages 4 and 5. So from here we need to choose what implementation method we'll use. Interactive reports we'll have a look at in a later section. For now we've built our workspace and our application. Now we need to start building pages so it looks more like a proper application. So So you can see that we've got a fairly simple framework that Apex uses to build pages very quickly in a very rapid application development style manner. In the next video, we'll create a search item on this report page. Creating an item on your first page. Now that we have our first report page, we'd like to be able to add some search criteria. We could have done this at some point during the wizard, but we'll use this as an exercise to create an item on our first page. Once this is done, we can more effectively find our records. I'll start from the application homepage, where I'll choose to start a lot of these videos, just for consistency. So to create our item, we need to open up our report page, and we can go and, under our region, right-click and create a new page item. So in this case, we'll choose a text field, and we'll call it search. Keep whatever page prefix is visible there, and this is a typical practice within the Apex development environment. I'll hit next. I'll leave the defaults here. I'll make it submit the page when enter is pressed. That way the user can type a search criteria in, hit enter, and the page will submit automatically. And I'll leave the source settings as they are. Then I'm going to edit the report region. So we can right click and edit that products region. And here we'll add a where clause to our report to say, is our search field within our product description. Apply those changes, and then we can run this page to see if our changes work. So there's our search field. Search for memory, for example. Press enter to submit the page. The page is submitted, the report is refreshed with the list of records that relate to memory displayed. So we've added an item onto the page, we've modified our report to consider the search criteria, and now we've got a searchable report page. Now we're ready to learn how to find the way around the rest of the Apex development environment. Finding your way around Apex. Now that you've learned to create some pages, let's view some of the key navigation techniques around the Apex environment. Familiarity with this environment will help you become a more effective developer. I pointed out before the developer toolbar down the bottom. This allows us quick access to edit the page of the application, and we have some other options that we'll look at later on in the course, such as the session state details and debugging options. So if we choose the application, it takes us back to the application homepage, where we can use this to drill into a lot of different areas, such as looking at the pages themselves, checking out the share components, exporting our application, and some other utilities and functions. So if we have a look at a particular page, such as the products report page, we can see that it's categorized into three main areas. On the left, there's the page rendering section. So this is all about how the page is built and constructed and then rendered by the browser. In the middle, we have the page processing section. So when you submit the page, it may need to do some validation or computation. You may have some standard processes that fire to update and remove records in the database. And on the far right, we have the share components. So any common components this page uses, such as list of values, navigation aids, or the templates this particular page utilizes. Across the top, we have what page we're currently looking at. We can use this to open up a list of values to take us to different pages in the application. We can use the next and previous page buttons here. After that, we have this tree and component view. The tree view was introduced in Apex 4. Previously, there was a component view, which I personally prefer to use, which lays the page details out in a slightly different manner and shows the same information, but in a different way. On the top right, we have a developer's toolbar where we can go and run the page, This cog here is a common link that I use to go into Share Components, and some other icons that may be useful, such as searching through your application, exporting the current page, and so on. We have a Utilities menu, which allows us to do certain things for this particular page. Some of the cross-page utilities are quite handy. But I'll go into Share Components as another example. And from Share Components, we're able to manage areas of the application, not just individual pages. So the Share Components are grouped into some logical areas, such as the application items and processes, navigation details, user interface, how the security works. So all this is packaged up in one area, which is nice and easy to access. And we also have, from our application homepage, the ability to export our application, which is good for backing up what you've done already, or importing it, or allowing you to import it into a different workspace or different instance. We also have the ability to copy and delete applications from taskbar menu options on the side. Keep an eye out on the right-hand side, because often there's some tasks and help details here that you wouldn't normally see. So there's some key areas and concepts you need to be familiar with to improve your awareness of how the Apex product works. And this concludes our section on getting you started with Application Express. Next section we'll look at enhancing your themes and templates. Section 2. Managing your themes and templates. While Oracle Application Express provides a number of themes and templates out of the box, we always need to modify and tweak those to suit our business needs. This section will show you how to modify these templates and utilize your own style sheet entries. And we'll do that by creating our own theme, adding custom templates, including images in our application, and referring to CSS and controlling the layout. So from our development environment, before we start making any changes and additions to our templates or pages, we should create our own theme, or at least make a copy of an existing one. This means that future theme upgrades to Apex won't impact our applications. So first we need to make a copy of our existing theme's metadata. So we can do this by going to Share Components and looking at the themes. Now, Apex's theme is built up of a number of templates, which is all stored as metadata within the Apex environment, and we can make a copy of this by using the task menu on the side and hit Copy Theme, and I'll type in 150 for a new theme identification number, and I can now copy that theme. The next thing we need to do is head to the folder where the physical files that support this theme are located. So in my laptop environment, I've got a 4.2 folder with the images directory under there, and this is where my environment sources all my images. In there, there is a themes folder where we can see all the themes that are supported in this environment. We originally used theme 25. If we copy that folder and call it 150. These are all our images, JavaScript, style sheets that are related to this particular theme. And then we can head back into our Oracle environment and switch the theme that we're currently looking at. So we can use the Switch Theme button. I'm going to switch from the blue responsive theme to our new theme here. And it attempts to match all the templates within there by using this template class. And sometimes there's warnings when it could be more than one of the potential classes that are specified, but it looks like these are all the same here, so I'll accept all those. And next, we can switch our theme, which means our application is currently using the blue responsive theme instead of the theme 25. The last task that you'll need to do is search through your application for the use of theme 25 and replace all those references to be theme 150, so it looks in the relevant folder instead of the stock folder. So we've made a copy of all the components of our theme, both in the development environment and the folder. We can start making modifications in isolation to those stock themes provided by Apex. We can also take it a step further and make your own theme available in the workspace and have it come up in the Create Application Wizard. But next we'll have a closer look at templates themselves. Creating a custom template. Oracle Apex comes with a range of themes, each with various types of templates, and each of those templates have various methods of customization. Here we'll discover a quick solution for tweaking page elements. For instance, with the products report, I'd like to change the report to have different borders around each cell, and also want to change the background of the heading. So to do this, I'm going to edit that particular page, and the first thing we'll do is take a copy of a template that's already available to us so we can make our own changes. So in the Share Components section, I'm going to edit the report template. This takes me into the Share Components templates area, and I'll just want to go back in the breadcrumbs and look for the horizontal border report, which is in our theme 150 under the report template types. I'm going to take a copy of this and we'll call it Packed Horizontal. Copy that template and we'll make our own change to that particular template. So we can edit the Packed Horizontal, scroll down to the Before Rows section. So this is the code that's rendered before each row, and we can add our own class to the class definition list that's here. Apply those changes, and we'll go back to edit our report page. From here, we'll edit the page details and add that class to our HTML header. So here it's got the class name packed, modifying table header to make it light grey. Apply those changes, and finally we can change the templates that's used by the report region. So I'll edit the report attributes and go down to the report template and change it from standard to a new packed horizontal, and apply those changes. And now when we run this page, we can see that the markings between each cell, instead of mainly being horizontal and our vertical, these borders here, and the background of our header on our report region has been made darker. So we can see that it's very easy to make minor modifications to our templates, and we can then use these modifications to make them either widespread throughout our application or specific to certain pages. Next, we'll have a look at including images in the application. Referencing CSS. You may remember adding some style sheet commands to page properties on the products report. Continuing to add these snippets would make maintenance difficult. Instead, we can compile these in our own CSS file and include it within our page template. So first, let's modify the products report and remove that snippet of code. So I'll take this style out and apply those changes. Instead, we can create a packed.css file and place it in the images folder. Now in here, there is some style sheeting that we've just removed, plus some more for later on in the course. And we need to include that within all our pages. So what we need to do is modify the page template to refer to that style sheet. So the page template here is one level of tabs, no sidebar. So I can edit that and scroll down to an area which allows us to include the various style sheets. There are some already for the particular theme, but we're going to add a new one referring to the image prefix substitution string, Previously we used workspace images, which allowed us to point to a file loaded into the database. Image prefix points to the images folder relevant to your Apex instance. So that allows me to refer to image prefix, Apex 4.2/images, and my file name I can add to the end here, packed.css, and that will include that file into our page template. Hence, when we run the page, we can see that the changes are still applied, and what we can do is right-click and inspect the element using my Chrome browser here. And we'll look at the thead tag, and we can see here there's our packed class from modifying the thead to a light grey, and it's now coming from the packed.css file as opposed to being inline. So here we've learnt how to include any form of supporting file to our web pages. In this case we used for a style sheet. Next we'll look at controlling the placement of regions within a page. Controlling layout. While Apex isn't exactly WYSIWYG, there are a number of ways we can control placement of components within our page. You'll learn two things in this video: how to control where regions appear on the page, and you'll have some more understanding of how templates work. To prepare, we're going to change the application properties and the default page template that's used. So we'll head into Share Components and modify the themes. And there are a number of ways to edit a theme. One way is to change the layout to a view report, and we see the themes listed here. That way when you click on the name, it takes us into the theme edit. And as we scroll down, we can see all the standard templates that are used every time you create a new component of some kind. So for pages, it's one level of tabs with no sidebar. Let's change it to right sidebar. And we'll apply those changes. And now when we run the pages, we can see that it's still the same, but there's an area on the side ready for a new region. So let's create a new region in that zone. We'll edit page 4, and we'll go and create a new region. We'll make it a simple HTML region, and we'll call it help. And the display point is the key point of interest here. We can use the torch on the side, and we can see a rough representation of what the template and all their various positions within in that template looks like. This one isn't abundantly clear where all the various positions are, but we can choose region position 3, for example, and move to the next section of our wizard. And say this is our page help. And we'll finish creating our new region. And when we run the page, we can see that our page help now appears in that sidebar region. And when we edit our page template, we can see approximately how that is working out, where we have our main region here with our main body, and there is a right-hand column with region position 3. And as you look at the template, you'll see all the other region positions scattered around, and this will differ depending on the theme and set of templates you're using. So by the simple process of adding a region to the side of our page, we've seen part of how Apex puts pages together. There are many other options, including conditional components and other template settings that are available to us. This whole section demonstrated how we can start customizing the look and feel of our application. The next section will see how to utilize the potential that the extensibility of Apex offers. Including images in your application. When you first start and run your application, you may find it looks a little bit bland without any images. One way to enhance your templates is to make images available for insertion. So first, we need to add a new image to our environment. We can do this by going to Share Components and adding an image under the Files Images to our Apex repository. This means the image will be loaded into the database as opposed to being located in the file system under the Images folder. So here we'll create a new image. I won't associate a particular application, but I'll choose my Grassroots Oracle logo and upload that to the Apex repository. Now we can go back to Share Components and edit the definition of our application so we can start to add a logo. Under the User Interface tab, there is a section on Logo, which at the moment is just packed. So we want to change that to an image. And we can use the Workspace Images substitution string. So this is surrounded by hash, and this will substitute the path necessary to resolve that image that we've just loaded in. So I can type that file name here and it will resolve that for me. This is as opposed to using the image prefix, which points to the file system, and we'll look at that later on. So I'll apply those changes and run the application, and we can now see our image, which is quite large, displayed in our application. So if we wanted to modify that, we can go back to edit our application properties under User Interface, and we'll add some attributes to that image, such as changing the height to be 70 pixels. And I'll apply those changes, run the application, and now we can see the same image in a more reasonable size. We can check out the end result by looking at the source code that's been generated for that page. And if I search for the file name, we can see that it's taken the Workspace Images substitution string and substituted it with this package procedure file name, passing through the Workspace ID and the file name to be rendered. And that is what enables Apex to pull the image out of the database and display it on our page. Next, we'll utilize our own CSS file, and we'll do that using the Images folder. Section 3, Extending Apex. There are a number of ways to extend functionality within Apex. You just need to know how and where to install the necessary code. Plugins are one you may have heard of, and this section will cover this and other ways to add features to your application, such as adding some JavaScript. We'll look at adding some visual effects to our application, loading delimited data such as CSV files, inserting some multimedia, and consuming some of these Apex plugins. But first we'll look at adding some JavaScript to our application. Many programmers don't start with an empty canvas. They may have a library of tools to include to gain instant leverage and functionality. For instance, you can provide a highly visual green and red colouring for field validation using livevalidation.com. So first we need to include our library in our page template. So I'll actually go to the Manage Products page and we'll edit the page properties. So we'll just add the JavaScript library required just on this page. So I've saved the JavaScript library to my Images folder, referring to it using the image prefix substitution string. I'll apply those changes, and now we can include a call to this library to provide feedback for the user. And in fact, we can do this by going back to the page properties. So when the page loads, we can execute two calls, one to the live validation package to instantiate list price as being one of the items that we want to validate. And we're going to add the list price as being something that needs to be a numeric. So I'll apply those changes, and finally we can run this page and enter a alphanumeric character in the list price, and it gives us the instant validation here of must be a number, as opposed to entering a number, and we get this green thank you message. This library includes a number of configuration options, so you can change these messages and colours. But what we've done is added an external library and added instant user-friendliness to the web pages that we build. Next, we'll see what sort of visual effects we can include. Adding visual effects to your application. Sometimes screen real estate is an issue and you need options to make the most of your content. In Apex, we can utilise jQuery components available in various libraries that are easy to integrate with your application. In this video, we'll create on our home page an accordion. First of all, we need to create a new template. So under Share Components, in Templates, we'll create a new region template. We'll do it from scratch. I'm going to call this accordion. Make sure you select your current theme, and for the template class, we'll choose Custom 1. So once that template is created, we can go and find it, edit our accordion template, and paste in the relevant details for our template. So there's a section template here, and there's also a sub-region template that we need to define, and I'll apply those template changes. Next, we can edit our home page and modify the page details to refer to the libraries that we need. So under CSS, we can paste our accordion CSS, and under the JavaScript, there's our JavaScript that we need to run, as well as when we when we load our page, this here, which will change this accordion ID into an accordion. So we'll apply those changes, and finally we can create some regions to demonstrate what this accordion will look like. So we'll create some regions, we'll create multiple HTML regions. The first one we can call accordion, example 1, 2, and 3. Our accordion will be our accordion template. Our examples don't need any template at all. We'll create those regions, and we just need to edit our example regions to maybe give it a little bit of source and set the parent region to be accordion. Just draft some text in the other example regions, set the parent up. So all three example regions are now a sub-region of our accordion template, and we can run our page to see what it looks like. So here's our accordion here. So as we click on the various headers, the detail appears. So we can see how we can conceal HTML content and allow the user to read it at will. This could be used for help information or perhaps some step-by-step instructions. And we can also do the same thing using jQuery mobile components by copying the HTML examples from the documentation into our region templates. Next up, we'll look at integrating other visual effects with the application. Loading delimited data. If the user would like to load a CSV file into a table in the database, one method is to use a mix of external tables, PL/SQL pipelining, and a well-designed user interface. Apex 4.1 makes this easier by releasing a wizard to build this process into your application, so we can extend Apex functionality and facilitate the loading of extra data from within the environment itself. So what we're going to do in this video is load this CSV data into our application. We'll need to cater for this job, which is in lowercase, and the department number, which is actual department names. So I'll go and create a new page, and we'll choose the data loading option. So we need to create a new definition name, so I'll call that packed, and also going to be loading into the emp table. So we'll use the emp number as our unique column. First up, we can define some transformation rules. So for example, with the job, I wanted to turn that into uppercase. So I can choose this transformation rule, add that transformation, and it becomes part of the data loading process. Next, we can define some lookups. So we want to look up the department number based on the department table, and we're going to return the department number based on the department name. So we'll add that as a transformation rule. We can define detail of our pages that it generates for us. So the wizard will generate a number of pages that facilitate the data loading wizard. I'll leave those as defaults. We'll call our new tab Data Load. And we'll branch to our home page. And we can confirm our new wizard. So we'll run this page, and we can see that it's a data loading page. The first step is to define our source. So it can be uploaded from a file or copy and paste into this area here. So in this case, I'll choose a file, choose the lookup CSV. Everything is separated by a comma, enclosed by quotes. Yes, the first row has columns, and we'll next through our wizard. So we can see our wizard process here, which does actually work better across the top of the page. But in this case here, we've loaded the data from the CSV. It's tried to allocate the various columns to their locations in the table. And dep number here, we can see currently has the department name, and job is also lowercase. So that's the mapping. So once we click next, the data validation has occurred. So it's uppercased all our jobs, and it's found the department number. So we can then load that data, and we can see that it's updated 14 rows. So it would have set whatever detail is in here against the employee records. So instead of writing our own facility, we've used an Apex wizard to create customizable pages to facilitate the loading of CSV data. This gives you more time to focus on other areas. Next, we'll have a look at including multimedia in our application. Inserting multimedia into your application. Today's world, multimedia is an integral part of the internet experience. With a few steps, we can extend our application by embedding video content in the web page loaded from the database. First of all, we need to create a form and report combination to manage our blobs table. So we'll create a new page, create a new form on a table with a report. I'm going to choose Classic Report to keep things simple, and note the page number here, page 13. And I'm going to step through most of the defaults as we go through. So the table name is Packed Blobs. I will use a new tab called Blobs. Columns are in the report. Now when I get to creating the form page, I'll use the same page number just to put both of these on the same page. I'll use the ID column as my key. And I don't have a trigger on here, so I'll just use an existing sequence. And I like these fields on my form page. So we'll create this page 13, form report. And before we go any further, we need to edit this page and modify the file browse item. So in this case here, it's this P13 blob. And we need to add MIME type and file name columns to this settings definition here for the blob. That means when we upload a file, it'll automatically populate those columns. The next thing we need to do is hop into SQL+, and we'll paste in code here, not that code, the code that we need to use to render our image on the screen. So this creates a new procedure called download my file, which selects the information from the table and renders it in a certain way. And we grant execute on this procedure to our Apex public user. Now we can go and create a dynamic region on our page that will display this video when we select the relevant record. So we'll create a new region, and it's going to be a new dynamic PL/SQL content. I'll call it MyBlob. And the code that we use here is going to generate some HTML source that uses our new procedure. We're on page 13, takes the ID and renders this video. I'll only bother displaying this when the ID field is not null. And we can run the page. So here we have a form where we can choose to load a file. So there's a video I've created earlier. Create this record which loads the video into the database, and once that's uploaded we'll see the video there. When I edit that video, there's my new video region on the page that displays this video content. So this method of displaying videos is also applicable to other MIME types, used often for images. So once you've learned one technique for displaying a number of different types of objects, you can apply that throughout your application. Next up, we'll look at implementing some plugins. Consuming an item plugin. Plugins were introduced in Apex 4.0 thanks to Patrick Wolf. They allow the developer to extend the functionality Apex provides out of the box. In this video, we'll use a plugin available for download and incorporate it within our application. So under Share Components, we can download and install plugins. So under User Interface, there's a Plugins option, and we can view the plugin repository. This will open up the Oracle site, which has a number of plugins. Some of these are region-type plugins, item plugins, process, and they will extend over time. And there's community plugin repositories as well. So if you look for Group by Select List, this is the plugin we'll install in this video. So you can download the plugin, and once that's done, you can come in here and import. So if you choose a file, the plugin will be a SQL file, just like your exports. And we can import this plugin to our application. So the plugin's now installed, and there it is. We can open the plugin and have a look. We can see the code that it contains, some of the attributes that it has, what it does. But what we really want to use this for is to be able to create a new item in our application that uses this format. So if we go into the products report and create a new item, we'll now see this plugins option come up now that we have an item plugin. And out of all the plugins we've installed, only one's available, since we've only installed one. And we can call this product category. I'll add it to the products region. I'll leave the label. It's not required, but I do want a list of values to be used, because that's what this item is all about. And normally we can see the example down the bottom, which is part of the plugin. But in this case here, we actually need a 3-column query. One for the value you normally see and the ID that comes with it, plus a third option which groups our list of values. So in this case, I'll have a null value of select category, and I'll create this item. So now when we run the page, we have a new item on our page where we can select the category, and all our item categories are listed here. I should have put it distinct in. But we've also got this grouping here. So this subcategory, all these subcategories are grouped by product category. We can't select these, but we can select the options underneath. So this is an example of an item that doesn't come out of the box from Apex, but we've installed a plugin and we can supply our relevant LAV and the item will still render as described. This enables us to take advantage of richer HTML features without having to code the extra functionality ourselves. All necessary integration with Apex has been done for us. Over time, some of these plugins may find their way into the stock install of Apex. That concludes this section, which shows us an easy way to take Apex beyond what is supplied out of the box by the Oracle development team. Next up are some lessons on how to use dynamic actions. Section 4, Dynamic Actions. This section will cover arguably the best improvement to Apex in version 4, Dynamic Actions. These will allow you to declaratively deploy browser-based interactions in your application with only a fundamental awareness of JavaScript. Videos will include getting and updating data from the database without submitting a page, disabling fields on item selection, refreshing a report just like you'd see in Google search, and adding browser-based item-level validation. But first we'll look at getting data from the database without submitting a page. A very common question is asked: how do we do form style validation in the browser? The answer is dynamic actions. So what we're going to do is go to the home page and create some items where we can type in a product ID and it will fetch us a description. So first we need to create a new region on the page as a placeholder for our new items. I'll call it DA for dynamic actions. Now I just need an empty region, so now we can create our items. And what we can do is create multiple items using a tabular form. Because we're going to create 2 items, it's a little bit quicker. So we've got a product ID, product name, and the ID, we can't choose a number here, but it's okay. And we'll put it on our dynamic actions region. So create those 2 items, and there they are. Then we'll create a dynamic action that allows us to run some PL SQL. So down the bottom we can create a new dynamic action, and we'll call this fetch product. And step through the wizard, and we want to do this on change of an item, and the item will be our product ID. So basically when the user submits or enters a product ID, it will fetch the name. So we want to execute some PL SQL, and we're fetching into page 1 product name. And the key part of this is the page items to submit and to return. And this tells the database what the values in the browser is, and once this PL SQL does its work, it will then update the browser with the product name coming from this PL SQL. When we have an error, in this case here I've missed the semicolon, and we'll continue through the wizard and create our dynamic action. Now we can run the page and see the dynamic action in action. If we took a product ID of 40 and press tab, it's registered the change, it's run our dynamic action and fetched that record from the database. If we clear out the ID, we get no data found because we haven't caught that exception for that select into implicit cursor. But that's something I can leave with you. So this was achieved using a dynamic action, providing the potential for PL SQL interaction with the database from the browser without submitting the page. Next we'll see how we can update the database without submitting a page. Updating the database without submitting a page. Using a similar technique as in the previous video, you will find out how to update your data without submitting the page, thereby saving on network traffic and improving the user experience as they are less likely to lose their data. So we'll extend the product details on the home page so that when we hit the save or a save button, it will affect those changes in the database. So we'll create the save button on our dynamic actions region, and we'll call it save, and to demonstrate something slightly different, we'll add a class of save me to the button attributes. This will come into effect when we define the dynamic action. The last thing we need to do is ensure that the action is set to defined by dynamic action. We'll create that button so we can then create the dynamic action. So we'll call the dynamic action save product, and it's going to be on click, and normally with buttons we can set the click of a button and specify the button. But just to demonstrate what else we can do with dynamic actions, I'll set the selection type to jQuery selector, and here we can refer to our SaveMe class. We want to execute some PL/SQL, which will update the products, setting the product name where the product ID is equal to that which is in the browser. So we need to ensure that we submit both these values from the browser to the database, so the update statement knows those values that are in the browser. So I'll create that dynamic action, and now we can run the page. So here I've typed in 31, which opens up the 1.44 floppy disk. So I'll change this to thumb drive and hit the save button. Now I've added no feedback to the save button, so we need to go to the database to check that that has actually affected the change. So sure enough, I run the statement and I can see that the thumb drive has been updated. So this allows you to run PL/SQL from browser events, which means you can create applications less dependent on standard browser behavior. Next we'll see how we can disable fields on item selection. Disable fields based on item selection. Some fields on screen may not be relevant based on the value of a prior selection on the same page. So to provide a more interactive experience, you can disable or hide fields that aren't required. One way to do this is call some APIs that are available from JavaScript. For example, you may see code, particularly in older versions of Apex, which run the $fDisableOn value, and then based on various parameters, certain fields will show or hide depending on the value of those fields. All this is still documented in the Apex API reference documentation. There's a chapter on JavaScript APIs. Here they all are. And you may also find some other documentation sites handy, such as the W3 Schools for anything HTML or JavaScript. And there's a number of sites related to the jQuery API. Back to our task at hand. When we run our application and we edit a particular product, we could set it up so that, for instance, if the weight class was over a certain value, then one field may be disabled and the other one hidden. So we're going to create a dynamic action to do that. So I'll edit page 5 and create a new dynamic action. And we'll call it something like hide fields. And it will be on change of a certain item, and we'll make it the weight class. And in this case, we'll have a condition. And I want the condition to be a JavaScript expression to say that if the weight class, so the value of the weight class in the browser, is over 3, then the condition is true. So in this case, we can set up a hide and we want to affect an item. So we can hide the catalog URL and in creating this dynamic action, I now have a hide and a show depending on the true or false nature of our dynamic action. And we can extend this further by adding another true action to disable, for example, the item supplier ID, and we can also add the relevant enable in the false action. enable about item supplier ID. We don't necessarily need to fire this one on page load. So we can see that with the conditions in the actions as well when they fire, and whether they're true or false and what they do. So we'll run this page now and see that if we put in a weight class of 4 and hit tab, our supplier ID is disabled and the catalogue URL removes completely. Set it back to lower than 3 and we can edit our supplier ID and maintain the catalogue URL. So what we've done is change the field requirements based on user selections within a form before we've submitted the page or executed any validations. Next we'll see how we can refresh entire regions without submitting a page. Refresh a report like Google. When you have a standard search page, there's no dynamic action. So if we run our application and go to the products page and search for something, we need to press enter before it submits the page and runs a search. If we could do this without submitting the page, we can create a more dynamic and interactive application. The finished product would be suitable for a point of sale system, similar to Google's auto search. It refreshes the report region after each key press. We'll start by modifying the search to focus on results for the product name and description. So I'm going to modify my source to look for product name and description in the search field or if the search is blank. And what we also need to do is make sure that the value of P4 search is updated in session state so the database can use it here. Under the report attributes, also make sure that the enable partial page refresh is set to yes. And then all we need to do is define our dynamic action. So we'll call this refresh report. And it's going to be on change of an item of our P4 search item. In fact, it's not going to be on change, it's going to be on key release. So every time the user presses a key. And we're going to do a refresh. And it's going to be for a region, and it's going to be a products region. And now we can run our page. So if we start typing C, A, you can see the region here being refreshed each time, R, D, and I get a final set of results for anything that has the word card in there. So we've taken a simple report and with one simple dynamic action, we've made it to behave like a more advanced websites you may encounter on the web. With this, you may see the potential for other types of refresh events. Next, we'll have a look at browser level validation.
Adding browser-level validation. Data quality in an application will improve the earlier you validate. In this regard, it may be preferential to validate data from the browser before you submit the page. Earlier, we did this using a JavaScript library. Now we use a dynamic action. So consider the Manage Products screen again, and perhaps we'd like to ensure that the minimum price is at least 0. So what we need to do is define a dynamic action. Call it minimum price, and it'll be on change of the item, and it'll be the minimum price item, and the condition can be, well, in our case, it'll be less than 0. So if the minimum price is less than 0, the dynamic action will fire. And we would like to execute some JavaScript. We don't need to fire on page load, only when the item is being changed. And in this case, we'll just do a simple alert. There are other options out there, such as jQuery alerts and other plugins that can be used for notification. But for simplicity, we'll use the alert, and it will display this message. In our case, there will be no false action. And we can create the dynamic action. We can now demonstrate this, run the page, put in a minimum price of 1, and it's all okay. -5, and we get the error message displayed. So we've created a dynamic action here that is nice and simple and yet very effective. And in this whole section, we've created a range of dynamic actions, showing there's usually multiple ways to solve a problem, offering great flexibility. This means it's very easy to create more interactive applications with declarative behaviour and simple SQL. This concludes our section on dynamic actions. Next up, we'll look at reporting options with Apex. Section 5. Reporting from Apex. While Apex does not provide a rich reporting environment out of the box, it does provide some features that allow the user to have an interactive experience with their data. This section will have a look at getting clever with CSV reports, then explore what interactive reports can do. And finally, we'll finish up with looking at BR Publisher reporting. First of all, we're going to have a look at generating a URL link to a CSV export. Apex provides a declarative way to include an option to download a report to CSV, and we can demonstrate that using the products report. Edit the report attributes and scroll down to the report export. We set that to yes and apply a label. When we run this page, we can see a link at the bottom of the screen that enables us to export the output to CSV. This link looks just like this, where we've got our usual application and page number, session ID, and it has a special request here which is asking it to export to a CSV output for a particular region ID. And we can generate this URL and generate this report ourselves. So we'll edit the application and go to page 1 and create a new classic report region. So it's going to be a report, classic report, and we're going to make it hidden, so I'll call it hidden and paste in a simple select from My Products. And when you get to the conditional display, set it to never, as it will never appear on the page, but we'll still be able to utilize it. To be able to utilize it, we need to edit it once we've created it and apply a static ID in the attributes section. This is so we can refer to this particular record in the metadata in just a moment. So apply those changes and then create a new hidden item. Now this item is going to generate the URL required to export the CSV. Export URL. And once we've created the item, create a computation on that item. There's going to be a SQL query that returns a single value, and the query generates the URL with our special export command and our region ID, which has been taken from the relevant dictionary table by finding it using the static ID. And once the computation is there, we can now add a button that utilises that computation to export the report. Call our button Export. And instead of submitting the page, it'll redirect to a URL, which is this syntax here of our item, surrounded by the substitution string syntax. So now that when we run our page and click the button, Export, there's our hidden region exporting the CSV to file. And there's our export. So now that when we use this button, it's calling the hidden region, so we can use this concept of generating reports from hidden regions to define a number of reports within a page, and you could even parameterize those. Next up, we'll look at creating an interactive report. Create interactive report.
So far we've only been experimenting with classic reports. In this video, we'll look at interactive reports and explore the rich functionality they can provide. This potentially means you can provide alive and interactive reporting solutions to your users instead of using and generating static PDFs. So first we'll create a new page as a report, but an interactive report. And I'll call it IR, which is a common acronym for interactive reports. And I'll create a tab with the same name. And the query is just a basic query on My Products. So I'll create this page and run it to see what we get without any extra additions from the developer. So we get a standard report, but with this extra toolbar across the top, which has an Actions menu where we can select certain columns that we might like to include or not include. So let's hide these columns, for example, apply, and now we see a different set of columns. We can change the ordering by clicking on one of the headers. And some of the other options under the Actions menu include some formatting options, such as adding computations or aggregations. We could turn it into a chart. And a number of these settings we can ultimately save as a report. And when we're signed in as a developer, we can say that it's the default report settings. So this is what everyone sees at runtime when they open this page. So it moves a lot of the configuration from the design time to the runtime environment. When we save these reports, we can also save them as a named report for later use, and we can also enable an option to allow people to save public reports. Searching also works a little bit differently. If we search for camera, it does restrict our report, but it also shows our criteria across the top, which we can toggle on and off, or we can remove the filter entirely. We'll now go and edit the interactive report region and see some of the differences between classic and interactive reports. The region definition settings are the same. We have source and various attributes that we can modify. The report attributes are where most things are different. Column definitions aren't as configurable, although we can use this to say which ones are definitely hidden. Pagination settings are simplified. And we also have a highly configurable search bar, so we can turn off such options as flashback, which many users wouldn't be familiar with, but we could enable the ability to save public reports. So configure report and save it and make it available for other users of the application. There's some download options, and we also have a link column. So instead of linking to the single row view, we could link to our own custom target. So it could be a page in our application, such as our Manage Products page. And here we'd identify, we need to send through a row ID to identify the record, which can come from the row ID in our report. So instead of using the stock single row view that the interactive report has, I can now apply those changes, run, and when I click on that link, it takes me to the Edit Products page. So as you can see, it's pretty easy to generate an interactive report, and the Apex environment will do the rest to provide additional functionality. This provides a good platform for other extensions and features to further enhance our applications. Next, we'll have a look at the Actions menu and see what we can do with saved reports. Configure interactive reports. Now that we've defined our first interactive report, it's time to have a closer look at what we can do within the Actions menu. Once we've done this, you'll see how you can provide a number of reporting facilities to your customers without needing anything more than the Apex environment. So first we'll go back to our runtime and edit our interactive report. And under the Actions menu, we'll do things such as adding a sort. So I already sorted the category before, but I'd also like to sort by a subcategory. So we can add 2 levels of sorting in our report. We can also add a control break. In this case, we'll use the category. This puts category up the top with its list of products until it gets to the next category. So that's the control break. And we'll also add an aggregate. So it's a new aggregate. Let's average the list price, for example. We don't see that yet because we haven't selected the list price as one of our columns. in the report. So there's our list price, and there's our average. And what we can do now is save this report as a named report available to other users of the application. So under Actions, Save Report, we now have this public option because we checked it in the previous video. And we can say this is by category as a named report available to everyone else. So when we apply those changes, we get a new option at the top, which shows the primary report and the other options that we also have. So let's add a second saved report there, but first we'll add computation, and so let's call this markup, and it's going to be the list price times 10. And there's our markup, quite large in this particular case. And I'll save this as the second report. So we now see two options in our public report settings. So with this, we can now go back to our report builder and check things like the Save Reports tab, where we can see our primary report and a number of public reports that are available to other users of the application. And we can provide links to these reports. For example, these link examples here have a request, which is a special IR report with a application or a report alias on the end. So we can rename those if we like. But what we can also do is inquire the Apex dictionary to gather this and do things such as share components, create a new list, and we'll quickly create a new list from scratch, which is going to be a dynamic list as a menu. And the query is going to be querying our Apex dictionary, looking at all the interactive reports that are public for this application, where the report name is not null. So let's quickly create a region on this page, just to demonstrate what we can do. And there's our markup and category interactive reports that we can essentially create as a menu, linking to these versions of the reports. So now we've seen some of the added features interactive reports can do, and how we can save these reports as pre-canned reports available to just the current user or to all the users of the application, in addition to the view as defined by the developer. Next, we'll look at the detail view that was introduced in Apex 4.1. Interactive Reports Detail View. When Apex was first being developed, interactive reports weren't available. As the product matured, features were added to provide the developer with more flexibility. Apex 4.1 introduced the detail and icon view to interactive reports. A great example of this online is using the Apex blog aggregator apexblogs.info, which now redirects to our ODTUG. So this is an example here of an interactive report, which is essentially displaying a list of blog posts. We can look at another example in the sample database application. This provides a list of products in an interactive report, which appears as a typical report, using the detail view laid out a little bit differently, or in the icon view as a list of icons. And we can use this sample application as a reference point on how these sort of interactive reports are built. So if we go to the interactive report for this sample application, we can see there's the icon view, which sets up the icon view with various column information. So there's a column called detail image with no style. And in the detail view, it's also set up before every row some styling information. For each row, it lays out a table setting exactly where certain columns need to appear. And after each row, it closes off that table and finishes it off to make it look nice. We can do the same thing in our own products list. We don't have images, but we can adjust the detail view to make it look a little bit more exciting. So go down to your interactive report and modify the region attributes, and go to the detail view, and let's enable this. Before every row, we're going to open up a new table, and for each row, the table is going to include things such as our category, subcategory, our list price with certain styling over the top of it, and each row is going to be finished with a closed table. And finally, we'll configure the interactive report to show this by default. So with the execute when page loads, set this greport.data.view to be detail. So now when we run this report, this page, The report sets to View Detail by default, and we see the detail view as something a little bit more creative than the standard tabular form. So we see our category shaded here, subcategory with our name, and a slightly larger cost in italics. This means that you aren't limited to long-standing standard output you've had for your reports. You can potentially use interactive reports to build pages that don't even look like an interactive report. The next video will look at using BI Publisher. BI Publisher reporting. While Apex is a great product for rapid application development, its reporting capabilities aren't strong out of the box. Oracle recommends using BI Publisher as the accompanying reporting tool. To use BI Publisher in Apex, we need to head to Share Components and create a new report query. We'll call our report query Packed and leave the rest of those settings. We'll create our SQL query as something from My Products and move through the wizard. Now we get to the point where we can download the XML data of this query or the schema definition, and we can use those with our Microsoft Word. So I've downloaded the XSD schema definition. So now I can head to Microsoft Word where I've installed the BI Publisher desktop extension. Now using this, we can load up that XML schema. So I've loaded that schema into the Word environment, and now I can use an option such as the All Fields feature, which adds all those fields from the schema definition into the report, where we can then tailor the output to suit our needs. So we can add our images, headers, tidy up the table, do what we like to the report, and then that will be saved as a rich text format. So when you do the file save as, we'll need to save as RTF, rich text format. And once that's been done, you can come back to the Apex wizard and move through to update the report layout. So here, create a file-based report layout, which we have done using that packed RTF. Make sure we have a unique name. Now I need to load the file again. So now that we've defined our report query and definition and integrated the two together, we can use this URL and apply that to a button in our application, and it'll launch our BI Publisher report. It'll send through the XML data to the BI Publisher engine, and the engine will integrate that with the report layout and generate a nice PDF document. So BI Publisher empowers you with a great flexibility as you can use Word to construct your templates, but it is a licensed product. It integrates very well with Apex, but I can't demonstrate the final result on my environment because I don't have BI Publisher installed. This concludes the chapter on Apex reporting. Next, we'll limit reinventing the wheel by utilizing Apex supplied APIs. Section 6. Using supplied Apex APIs. In this section, we're going to have a look at the supplied APIs that Oracle provides to save us reinventing the wheel. This section will cover some of the APIs relevant to Application Express that relate to custom tabular forms, reading checkboxes, application help, and creating some background processes. First up, we'll have a look at dealing with tabular forms. Tabular forms allow us to process many fields at once, and they can be built in a number of ways. In this example, we'll take a copy of the products report and turn this into an updatable report, and we'll process the information that we receive via some PL SQL, which is a common requirement regardless of how tabular forms are built. So first we'll take a copy of this tabular form, which is under Create New Page as a copy. Copy this page, and I'll leave all the defaults as I skip through the wizard, which gives us a new copy of that products report, which I'm now going to edit the SQL. Here we'll add call to the Apex Item API. Now this is a PL SQL package that generates the HTML required to render a hidden item on the screen, as well as a text item. For the text item, we're going to use the list price column. So we'll add those to our report. I'll modify the report attributes. We'll give ourselves a bit more space on the screen by removing some of these fields, and we'll run the page to see what we have. So now we have a report which has this list price edit field, which at the moment we can only see the HTML. That's because we need to edit that column. So the list price edit column, and instead of displaying as text, escaping any special characters, we need to use the standard report column. Now when we run the page, we see it as a report column that we can modify. But first, we need to add a button on the page. I'll just add it to the products region, region position, and we'll just call it save. And we'll skip through. It'll be for submitting a page. And now we can create the process which handles the person updating the list price. So we'll add a page process. Say PL/SQL. Save list price. On submit. Our PL/SQL process will do a bulk bind based on the information received into this array. Now this information you can find in the Apex documentation. So here's release 4.2. Under the API reference, there is an Apex application package. And in here, you can find references to these arrays and how they're used. And in this case here, we're using it to bind into our My Products, updating the list price based on the value in that field there. And we're displaying a message to the screen by saving a value into this gprint process print success message in the Apex application package. So here I missed a semicolon, and we'll complete our process, run the page. Here I can change to $53, submit the page, and it tells me I've got 15 products updated. That's because in that SQL, we didn't put a protection in there for only updating records that were changed. But what we've done is modified this report to generate HTML on the fly, and then process this data manually as a PL/SQL process on submission of the page. This will give you the flexibility when it comes to modifying classic reports to include updatable information in lieu of full-blown tabular forms. Next up, we'll see how we process checkboxes, which behave a little differently in a similar scenario. Reading a checkbox programmatically. Handling checkboxes in tabular form submissions often causes confusion as it's submitted as a dense array compared with other field types wielding an array the same size as the number of rows displayed. It's like comparing apples to oranges. This diagram shows the difference. A field that's hidden or as normal text will have one entry per record. So the previous example had list price, which showed a number of rows on the screen, and regardless of whether those text items had any values or not, we had an entry in the array. Checkboxes normally contain an ID or a row number, and there'll be one element in the array for each checkbox checked, not for every row, so there'll be no gaps. So for 3 rows displayed on the screen where 2 are checked, we'll actually have 2 values in the final dense array to process. And we need to consider that when we run our PL/SQL. So this video will take us through a demonstration of a simple algorithm that will make thinking and processing easier. It basically turns the dense checkbox array into a sparse array that matches the other fields arrays. So first, we'll go and modify our new products report and add a checkbox item. So there's our item checkbox, number 43, and it's just going to be a row number value inside the checkbox. None of them are checked. Apply those changes and run the page. And here we're only displaying the HTML, so we need to go back and edit our column definition, the checkbox to make it a standard report column. And now we can modify our process. So instead of it just handling the list price, we're going to cater for whether the checkboxes have been checked. So the process is a little bit bigger. Here's the align checkboxes procedure, which turns a dense array into a sparse array. So we align the checkboxes up with the remainder of the arrays, and then we'll process it as normal. And this time we get to say, well, if the checkbox is checked, we'll update the list price. So we'll apply those changes, and we have an issue. Once again, I've forgotten a semicolon. So finally we can run the page to see that it only updates those values that are checked. So if I turn this to 81 and 99, but I only check number 81. After I save it, this one's saved, one product has been updated, and this one has not. So checkboxes are a bit of a pain in Apex, but we can see that we can get around it, and it's only the HTML infrastructure that's to blame. So next up, we'll have a look at a nifty API that will allow us to publish Apex help metadata. Using Apex application.help. So far we've added free text help to one of our pages. If we run our application, head to our products page, we've got some help on the site. Apex offers us an API that makes it easier to display more help information from the page, direct from the metadata. If we go and edit our page 4, and edit the page level properties, as we scroll down, there's a section called help. So here's a help text for this page. There's the default help, so this can be our search for a product, for example. And I'll apply those changes. And we've also got items on this page. So here's our search item, and again, if we scroll down to the bottom, we've got help text. Use this field to help find products, or something useful. So here I've applied 2 lots of help to our metadata, and now we want to display this on the page. So we can create a PL SQL region on a page, so create a new region. And we want PL SQL dynamic content, call it help as well. And again, we'll display it in region position 3. In this case here, we're using the Apex application.help API, which passes through the application we're currently on, page that we're looking at, and some other parameters to decide what to and what not to display. So if we continue creating this region and run the page, we'll see our existing free text help, now another help region, which generates the data directly from the metadata. And we can display this in a variety of ways. Note the documentation for this API can help you with the flexibility of the output. But using similar concepts, you can modify your templates as well, so you can source all your application's help from your own tables, and you can empower your users to maintain this information themselves, as unfortunately no APIs currently exist that allow you to modify the metadata at runtime. Next, we'll have a look at recording site activity metrics by counting clicks on external URLs. Counting clicks with apexutil.countClick. Previously we added video content to one of our pages, but unlike Apex page activity, we can't run metrics over how many times the video was downloaded. By using an API supplied by Apex, we can adapt an elegant solution. Previously, the blob column was used to formulate a download link declaratively using a format mask. So if we go to our blobs page, that was the report. The blob column has this declarative number format here, so that when we run the page and we hover over that column, we get a link generated for us. First, we'll prepare a link that we can call ourselves. So we're going to create a procedure called myCountClick. We compile into the database. We also grant access to the Apex public user. And this prepares a URL that sends information through to the Z function. And all that's done is wrapped my call to the download my file procedure. So now we'll go back to the query definition of this page, and we'll add call to myCountClick. And we don't need to display that URL because we'll associate it with the file name. So we'll go down and provide a column link for the file name, which can be displayed as just the file name as the text. and the URL will be the column that we just added, and apply those changes. So now when we run this page, the file name is also a link that we can click on, and we can see in the status bar there that it's calling the Z function, and it's essentially counting this click as being clicked. So this means that we can come back to SQL Developer and select star from Apex Workspace Clicks. And we can see that I've just clicked on that record there. So using this technique, we can count clicks on anything that's linked to external websites, for instance, from within the report. Next, we'll see how we can use an API to manage our environments. Managing your workspace with supplied APIs. Previously, I showed you how to export your application using the browser. Once you start developing applications, you'll need some tools to help manage your environments. Let's say you're preparing a new workspace to hold your application, perhaps for a test environment. Presuming your schema is already created, you can use an API to create this workspace, users, and applications. To enable one of our database owners to do this, we need to grant the Apex administrator role to your schema owner. From there, you can then execute procedures such as Apex instance admin add workspace to create a new workspace and then subsequently create users and other things. All these APIs are documented under the Oracle Application Express documentation. You can Google it. The first result will give you one of the oracle.com websites, and this will have a link to the full library or some of the API guides. So for example, if you run through the full library, go to the API reference, then all these packages are available and documented. So if we go back and run this script here, I've now added a workspace and created some users, and the following script will allow us to set up an application with some predefined detail. And I can then run the import script, refer to the script name, and that's now importing one of our applications into our new workspace. We can test this by logging into our new workspace. Page new. And in the application builder, there's the application that I imported. So essentially performed the first two steps in our video series via an API instead of a Apex browser interface. This can make the management of your Apex environments more efficient and effective. This concludes our chapter on Apex APIs. Next up, we'll look even closer at the Apex environment, exploring other methods of debugging. Section 7. Looking closer at the Apex environment. At face value, Oracle Apex is an excellent rapid application development tool. But what features does it offer the developer to assist with managing applications and debugging? This section will look at ways of improving the development experience by setting up application subscriptions, looking at debugging exercises, some ways to deploy and manage Apex with SQL Developer, and a way to extend the development environment. First, we'll look at taking a copy of an existing application so we can manage some application subscriptions. So we'll take a copy of Pack 7 from 113 to 115 in my case, and what we'll do is link up some templates between these applications, so when we change one, the other will change accordingly. So it's being copied. Let's modify the new application, just to be clear which one it is. That's the child. And we'll modify share components templates, and we'll look for the new theme page templates. We're looking for the default page template, the right sidebar. And what we'll do is reference a master page template to copy from. So we'll copy from our original 113. There's our one level of tabs, right sidebar, 150. And we'll apply that change. And as we scroll down, we can see it's now subscribed. This means that if we go back to application 113, modify the home page, the default page template, and we can see here that there's a subscription template that's referencing this particular template is that child application 115. So when we look for logo and we modify what's displayed in our logo, So we're seeing the link and our My Application description. Apply those changes. And when we run our master application, we can see My Application 113 as our new title here. And we'll go back to the home and we'll open up the child application and run. We don't see the changes yet because we haven't pushed those changes via the template. So if we modify the child template, for example, we can refresh the template here. If we modify the parent template, we'd see a push button. So I've refreshed the template, copied it from the master template in the master application. So when we run our child, we also see these changes. So what we've done is created a link between these applications. This can be done anywhere you see subscription properties, which is all your templates and some selected shared components. This means it's very easy to create multiple applications that share a common look and feel. Next, we'll have a look at debugging our applications. Debugging an Apex application. It's essential to learn debugging tools for development environment to help pinpoint problems within an application. After this video, you'll know how to integrate your debugging messages with Apex's inbuilt instrumentation. First, we'll head over to the checkbox process we created earlier, and we'll add some debugging commands. This way we can track what's happening. So after the aligned checkboxes, I'm going to display some counts using the apex debug.message. This is the 4.2 version. There have been some changes over the versions in the past. They're all backwards compatible, but this is the current API. And we'll also put a message just before the update. We'll apply those changes and we'll run. And we can see in the developer toolbar there is a debug and a view debug option. So by turning the debug option on, we now see this parameter in the URL set to yes. This is turn debugging on. There are other ways and means of turning on debugging, but this now enables us to make some changes and submit the page. All this has been logged, so we can go and view the debug, which will give us a list of debug logs that have been recorded for given pages. And we want to have a look at page 11. Search for the word checkbox. And there's the process that was executed, as well as our output. 2 elements in the dense checkbox, 15 in the sparse. Also notice where the bottlenecks are in the debug log, and we can see that in the chart above. And that's the process that actually gets executed, which was the highest bottleneck in this particular debug process. So we've integrated our debugging needs with the Apex infrastructure. This will make it easier to debug your application, particularly within your own PL/SQL editions. Next, we'll see how we can use debugging within the browser. Debugging using the browser. With the growing amount of browser-based events, not all errors will be directly related to PL/SQL. This video will show you how to utilize some browser tools to assist you with debugging events caused by dynamic actions, for instance. So first we'll edit our products report page and add another action to the existing dynamic action. So we'll add a true action and we'll add it before the previous. So we'll make this one sequence 5 and we'll call some JavaScript. We don't need to fire it on page load. And this calls the library function apex.debug. This is a wrapper for the console.log function, which means it will only log this message when the Apex debugging is turned on. So it will log this string concatenated with whatever the value of P4 search is. So I'll create that action, and then when we run the page and we open up the console window, which in Chrome is Control-Shift-J. So here's our console. We start typing. We don't see anything down the bottom. If we turn debug on and we start typing, every time we press a letter, we see the console window information update with the value of P4 search. And we can see that the dynamic action has fired. We can use the same tools in other browsers, such as Firefox has the extension Firebug, which does a very similar thing to what Chrome does out of the box. and Internet Explorer also has its Developer Tools extension that can be installed. So we can use these tools to investigate and instantly experiment with layout. For instance, we can right-click Inspect Element on our new application header, and we can uncheck these font options here, and we can see the immediate response on the screen. So now we've added debugging to PL/SQL and JavaScript layers of our application. Next we'll see how we can use SQL Developer to manage and deploy Apex. Deploy and manage Apex with SQL Developer. So far we've seen how we can manage our application using scripts and supplied APIs. However, Oracle also provides a GUI interface with SQL Developer. This provides faster interactions with the environment. First, we can head over to SQL Developer and establish a connection with our workspace schema. In this case, it's packed. We can use this connection navigator to find the Application Express node, which is here, and we can use this to view the metadata of our applications. So there's our Pact 7 child application. These are the application properties. I can open this tab up and see the pages. Across here, I can also have a look at what computations and other components may exist within my application. But what we can do here is modify our application. For instance, set a global notification. So here I'll paste in a notification and I'll apply those changes. So let's now set it to this. So if I go to my runtime, I get this message up the top. Shut down for maintenance in 5 minutes, please save. So now if I go back to modify the application and then I change the status, I set it to unavailable. And note we can have a look at the SQL that's been actioned here. So it's defining an autonomous transaction that's going to set some context and then set the status of this particular application ID to be unavailable. So if I apply that, it's been changed. If I go to refresh my page, it's now unavailable. And we can customize this message as well. So we've been able to control access of our applications not via the browser, but directly using the interface provided to us using SQL Developer. These features provide us with a quick mechanism to control access during the deployment of new versions of our application, and we can also use it to configure the Apex listener. In the final video of this section, we'll look at a third-party script to improve the developer productivities. Expanding the development environment. Apex development means spending a lot of time with the browser. I often have two different types of browsers open at once, and I consider many ways to eke out productivity while I'm working. Some Apex experts have created a browser plugin to assist with just that. ApexLib is something you can download and utilize with browsers such as Chrome and Firefox. In Firefox's case, by using the GreaseMonkey extension, which means that once you download the extension, you can just drag and drop it into your browser. You can open up the script. It's unobtrusive, you can see what it does. But basically, when we're in our development environment and we look at, for instance, our product source, instead of seeing black and white in a normal text box, we can choose to see it syntax highlighted in the PL/SQL syntax, for example. Or if we're looking at templates, instead of seeing it in black and white, we can choose the HTML option and see it in a more appropriate colour scheme. Other advantages is that there's some common shortcuts now available in the search bar. So if you put a question mark there, we've got a number of shortcuts that now become available just by typing Go Share Components, for example, in the search bar. So there's options in addition to the icons. But I find the main advantage is using the syntax highlighting to make your code easier to read. And in a few short moves, essentially, we have shortened the amount of time to navigate through common actions and make it easier to read code embedded within our Apex metadata. This ends the review of the Apex working environment. Next, we'll have a look at security. Section 8, Apex Security. Security is an important part of any application. This section covers the three major security components of Apex: authentication, authorization, and session state protection. And we'll also look at two typical threats for web-based applications: cross-site scripting and mitigating SQL injection. But first we'll look at securing our application with a custom authentication scheme. Let's say you have an existing set of tables that define your logins and roles.
of course, you'd like to leverage these for your Apex applications. So this means your users could use the same logins for Apex as they do the other legacy applications. So first we'll define our set of tables for our users. So we'll create a table called packed users. Then we need a custom hashing algorithm. Now this will hash our passwords so they're not decryptable or readable by humans. Then we'll create a trigger on the users table to ensure that the username is in uppercase and the password is hashed. And then I'll create some users that we can test our logins with. And commit. Now we can define our authentication scheme. So hop into Share Components. And as a quick review, under the Security Attributes, this is the tab under the Application Settings. We'll see things like the current authentication scheme and various other security settings that you can manage. But we want to define our authentication scheme and be different from the existing Apex authentication scheme, which is the default. So we'll create a new one, and we'll create one based on the pre-configured scheme from the gallery. So there's a few examples already set up for us. It would help us along. So we'll call it Custom Authentication, and you can see there's a number of scheme options, so you could use LDAP if you desire. But for this case, we'll choose Custom. And we have a number of settings come up relating to custom authentication. I'll paste in some code we have prepared, which is our custom authentication, which requires this signature here, username password returning true or false. So it has a look at our packed users table, determines whether they're end-dated or whether the password's correct, and returns true or false accordingly. So that function becomes our authentication function name. And if you look at the item help, you can see that there's a hint for what this custom authentication procedure should look like, which is very much what I have now. And we can create this scheme, and it becomes our current authentication scheme straight away. So I'll open a new browser to test this theme out to show that it's not our past theme that's actioning our authentication. So if I attempted to log in as the admin account, which we've been using previously, it doesn't allow us to log in. And 4.2 also introduces the ability to stop you from making repetitive logins for denial of service attacks. So if we put in our Wesley user and log in, we succeed. So that returns true. I'll log out and attempt the demo fail, which I'll just test the password for. And there we fail because I entered the wrong password. If I put in demo expired, which has an expired account, and I put in the correct password, it still fails because that account is expired and the function returned false. So we can see it takes very little time to define a different way to authenticate your users, which gives you the flexibility to do almost whatever you need. Now that your users can log in, let's have a look at limiting what they can do. Protecting your pages with authorization schemes. Now that you've let your user into the application with your authentication scheme, let's explore ways to limit the user's access around the application. There are many options within Apex to hide certain components, and security is built in. So first we need to define our authorization scheme. Think of it like a role. So there's authorization schemes. We currently don't have any defined, so let's create a new one from scratch. And we'll call it admin. And we have a number of options for our scheme type. In this case, for simplicity, we'll use a function returning a boolean, and we'll just return true if the current user is equal to admin. And our error message would be you're not an administrator if that scheme is violated. So I'll create that scheme. And now we need to apply these to a few components. So let's do one for the video page. If you edit the page properties, down the bottom, there is a security section. There's our authorization scheme, which we can say is or must be admin. So we'll apply that. And in our products report, we'll hide one of the columns. So let's hide the weight class. We can also use the tabs across the top to quickly link down to where the authorization is. And also on this page, we'll protect the create button so they can't create a new product. Now when we run this application, I'm currently logged in as admin, so I can see the weight class and the create button. So let's log out and log in as a Wesley user. Now when I go into the products screen, I can't see the weight class. I can no longer see the create button. And if I try and link to the videos page, I get that error message that we defined because my access was denied. So it shows that we also need to secure the links to our secured pages, just for neatness. So what we've done is essentially defined a role within Apex and attributed that role to certain components, which stops them from rendering during the generation of a page. Next up, we'll look at securing session state and demonstrate a form of row-level security. Configuring session state protection. You can put all your effort into providing new users the right links for the correct people, but if you're able to modify the session state by tampering with the URL, you might as well not provide security at all. In 2011, a large bank's customer accounts were breached using this technique. Apex provides the ability to protect from tampering by automatically adding checksums to the URL. For example, if we go into our product search screen and edit our TV tuner, we can take the row ID that's used to identify the record, so that when we're editing another record, we could paste it in, and instead of editing the memory card, we're now editing the TV tuner instead. So we want to protect from that. So our first step will be to limit which rows our people can edit. So we'll edit this page and modify our SQL to add a new column which will define our edit link. So only if the list price is less than 100 will we allow our users to edit. So go into the report attributes and hide that new column and edit our link. So the column link, instead of being the current icon, we're going to change it to the hashtag link URL, which is the new column we've just added. And that means when we run our page, we only see the edit links for records where the price is under $100. Our next step is to configure session state protection. So head into your application, modify shared components, session state protection, and we're going to set protection. We'll configure it, and we'll leave the settings as they are, which means that all pages must have some sort of checksum, including all their items. So now that session state protection is enabled, if we go back into our application, edit our memory card, we now see this checksum appearing at the top, which means that if we try to tamper with our URL and paste our TV tuner row ID, we get a message saying the checksum that has been computed does not match what was originally used. So you've protected your application in a similar way that many banks have been doing for years. This is highly configurable, and you notice that it applies to pages, application items, and page items. Session state protection should be one layer of defense of your data. The final two videos in this section look at other avenues of defense. Mitigating cross-site scripting. Don't trust any input from the end user. This should be an early security lesson for database developers. This is still true in Apex. It's possible to update a record with JavaScript code and have it execute when the page renders. Luckily, this isn't the default and it's easily fixed. The main key is awareness. To aid with this demonstration, I'm going to first modify one of our records to include some potentially malicious data. So here I've modified the catalog URL to include some JavaScript, or what would be JavaScript if it was part of our application. It will display an alert on the screen. So I'll apply those changes, and I can see that we don't have an alert on the screen, we just have the data as we see it. That's because, by default, Apex is escaping this data for us. So if we have a look at the page source, we can see that those square bracket tags have been appropriately escaped. If we go and edit the products report, must have timed out there, We'll edit the products report. And edit the catalog URL column. And instead of it being display as text, escape special characters, I'm going to set it to standard report column, which is what we do need for some columns. But you just need to be careful. So then when we refresh our page, the JavaScript is executed, and we see this message on our screen. If we have a look at the page source again, we can see that that's because the code has not been escaped, which is a concern. So we can mitigate this again by modifying our report definition. I must have some authentication issues here. So if we modify our report definition and change our catalog URL to call HDF escape SC for special characters and maintain our alias, apply those changes. This means when we refresh this page, it's escaping the data in our column. So in this case, we didn't need to act, but there's an important lesson here to be aware of. Next, we'll look at another publicised issue, SQL injection. Mitigating SQL injection. SQL injection is where a malicious user can edit extra SQL to an application. This can be used to return more rows, or in worse cases, do more damage such as delete data or drop tables. Thankfully, the Apex team has made it so you need to go out of your way to introduce it, but again, awareness is the better practice. First, let's create a new page. It's going to be a report. We'll make it a classic report, and we'll call it security. Add a new tab, and we'll use some SQL query that we have prepared earlier. Don't use this code in production, but this is demonstrating our injectable code. So we're creating page 4, I believe, and we'll leave the rest of the examples. I noticed it was page 10, so I'll just modify that to be page 10, and we'll then create our item on the page that's used by the SQL. This is going to be a text field called ename, and we'll leave the remainder of the defaults. Actually, go back and we will, not too far, settings. Some of these buttons aren't working properly just yet, but we want to submit when the enter is pressed, just to make life easier for us. Now when we run this page, we start off getting no data found. If we type in King, we can find our King record. The danger being, if we type in a query such as this, we get all our data. That's because this search criteria here has been inserted into our SQL, let's close off our quote, and then put an OR clause in our statement, thereby returning all the records. The simplest solution is to use bind variables, and use bind variables everywhere. So this restriction here just needs to be equals semicolon p10 ename, colon rather. So when we run this page, that returns no records, but King does. In rare cases where this can't be avoided, often with DDL, I recommend using the dbms assert. This will mean malicious users won't be able to access secure data in this manner or corrupt your database. So here we've demonstrated another layer of defense in protecting your data within Apex, thus concluding the section on security and ending this series on Application Express. I hope you enjoyed these lessons and continued to learn from the many facets of web development Oracle Apex has to offer. Thank you very much for listening.